Hello, hello. I am Caitlin Cadieux. I'm an animator and illustrator.
Hey there, I'm Ira Marcks. I write and I draw comics.
So we have had a week to contemplate after our first episode, which started out with the best intentions. We tried to put all of our Pixar feelings into 5 little discrete boxes, and we failed spectacularly, but we had a lot of fun unpacking the first half of Pixar's catalog. So if you're here now listening to part 2, thank you, and get ready, because as we look ahead to the post-2010 era of Pixar's catalog today, you will find our focus narrows considerably.
It is sharp as a knife, our focus is.
We're really in it today.
And to be honest, we're really mostly talking about one movie, Inside Out. We're going to talk about what happens when you set out to make a movie about what it means to be a human. No big deal, really. Just another day at the office. Also, we'll mix in a little dash of Coco, do a little rambling about our thoughts on memory and those realms beyond death. You know, the stuff of kids' entertainment. It's not the most structured podcast you'll hear today, but it just might be the most emotional.
Yes. Welcome to Cartoon Feelings.
All right, here we are, back in the Pixar universe.
Are we?
Oh, I don't know. Did you have some other?
No.
Just in it?
No.
Okay.
I was just very confused today, just from my own self.
Okay, well, maybe we'll reach some new places then with confusion. If you were clear-headed, it would just be the same old.
That's true. It's not as interesting.
So last time we were together, where did we stop?
We stopped. So we were barreling at a high speed. And by that, I mean like extremely slowly and meticulously through the entire Pixar canon. Trying desperately to focus on our list of like top 5 most important Pixar movies. And as a result, talking about every single one individually with very few exceptions. And you were about to discuss your final pick, which was Inside Out. And then I started rambling on about the 2010 era of Pixar and how things change and how they stay the same and blah, blah, blah. And we decided that that would be a good cutting off point. So we didn't actually get into anything about Inside Out.
Yeah, the top 5 concept has just fallen to pieces, I think.
It was a good focal point for kind of going through and I don't know, winnowing down. I don't know. I also want to say here at the top that like I feel like, at least I personally felt like I was very critical of a lot of the movies that I talked about, and I just wanted to say that I love all the movies that I talked about, and I think they're so great. And I don't know, we'll probably do this a lot on this podcast, but
yeah, just get out ahead of criticism, you mean?
Well, I was like, well, I'm going to be critical about this stuff because I love it so much.
Yeah, exactly. Let everybody know that's the constant footnote is we're talking about things we care about.
Yeah, like so deeply and intensely, like maybe too much. So yeah, I hope I said that a little bit last time, but just to emphasize that. But all this to say, you claim to have some interesting things to say about Inside Out. And I just rewatched this yesterday to catch up and refresh. So I'm excited to hear what you were thinking.
Okay, it's been a little while since I've seen this, so I can do the broad overview part, and then you can jump into the fresher feelings on it.
The nitpicking.
Yeah. So Inside Out to me is this one broke my brain a little bit when I first saw it because I had not seen any trailers, or if I had, they didn't stick with me in a way that I was like, I got to see that because I don't know. I actually should have watched one of the trailers beforehand because I imagine they were kind of vague.
Yeah, I don't remember them at all. I don't.
Yeah. I think this is 2015. We're getting into the art of the trailer being a really big thing. So everybody's trailers, especially for bigger franchises like Marvel or Star Wars or Pixar, their trailers are like, come on, you know you're just going to see this, so here's just a tiny taste of it. I think Inside Out might have been one of those, marketing approaches.
Yeah. It's funny, like the only thing I remember about, I don't even know if this counts as marketing, but like the little sentence that you would read about like Pixar's next movie will be about, and it was just about like the mind, like going inside the mind of like a young girl. And that was like it. And that's all I remember about it. But I know I must have seen trailers. I don't know.
It just seemed like one of those movies that, how did they arrive at this final product? Some of the Pixar movies, and the ones that I think both of us like the least, are the ones that are kind of obvious in their structure. Like the Cars series, again, not to shit on something we think is just fine, but there's no real surprises in how those movies play out.
Not a lot of complexity.
Yeah, Inside Out, I had no idea where this thing was going from the get-go.
Mm.
And listening to Pete Docter, the director, talk about it, I remember there was a YouTube clip of him discussing how he came up with the initial idea of just characterizing emotions and posing the question to like the concept artists of what do these emotions look like, and then generating 27 different emotions and picking through and deciding what's the best combination to tell this story, which is basically kind of an adaptation of his own daughter's interior life based on what he knows about her as a father, which is just such a weird art project idea.
Yeah, I do find that very appealing. I don't know. Like, it does make me wonder, how does it feel to be Pete Docter's daughter? And like, I don't know, it feels very personal, I guess, as a movie that, I mean, I don't know, it just feels like you're watching something rather intimate because of that. They were always very open about that was the inspiration of the story. And then it deals with like, her basically like being attacked by depression, essentially, from within. So it's kind of a heavy subject.
Yeah. When we arrive at those sort of darker themes, that's when these movies start to feel like they're a project helmed by a singular vision, Like in the way The Last Jedi feels darker because it's a Rian Johnson specific movie. Like Inside Out feels dark because it just must really be a Pete Docter project. Like it doesn't pull back on some of these sadder points, which I don't know. I feel like sometimes, at least not to get too dark about creating art, but if I'm left to my own devices, I lean into darker stuff because that's sometimes what you wonder about most when you're creating something, are just these like darker places that just don't come out unless you really dig into something.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know Pete Docter, but it's interesting now looking back on all the movies that he's done and realizing that it's not even always darker as in like something sad is happening in the background, but like there's like a complexity of emotion that he's getting at in his movies that I like don't really see in the other ones, in the other Pixar movies. Like in Monsters, Inc., like nothing really truly devastating happens, but the whole emotional impetus, like you talked about the gut punch, like in the last episode that we did, the gut punch of that final shot of like, was it Sully? Like, going back to Boo's room, and you don't even see her. Like you literally just hear her seeing him and like see his reaction, and like just all of that complexity of their relationship. Like that's very emotional. His movies have that. And even Up, like obviously it's very sad, like the wife dies, like all of this stuff. But there's just something about like what it's about, like this kind of old man who needs to figure out how to move on. I don't know. It's like a weirdly, like on paper, you're like, this isn't like a mass market. Like everybody's going to love this movie. And yet they are really good. And Inside Out is maybe like the most advanced version of that. It's such a weirdly specific premise. And yet people loved Inside Out. And I loved Inside Out.
Yeah. I mean, it's a blast to watch. It's just endlessly clever. And, maybe you could walk us through some of the scenes that really popped out. As to me, it's all just a jumble in my mind of the little world that they build So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe share some of your journey with just rewatching it recently.
Yeah. So of course I've seen it like 70 times already anyway, but it had been a little bit of time, and it felt right. So I threw it on because I knew we'd be getting into it. And, it is the first Pixar movie in a little string of Pixar movies. So there was Toy Story 3, Cars 2, and Brave, and then Monsters University, and then Inside Out. And I remember even seeing it in the theaters being like, oh, Inside Out feels like a Pixar movie again, which is weird to say. It's not that the other ones didn't, but it just felt classically Pixar. And I think it reminded me of the types of movies like WALL-E and Up. And it's just like, where are you getting these crazy ideas? Like they're just doing all of these like totally random ideas all over the place. And that's Inside Out felt like that again. And it was very refreshing. I'm trying to think of like where to even begin. Cause I do want to throw out like probably one of my favorite movies in a Pixar film in a while, like scenes in a Pixar film in a while is the, I don't know what they call it, but there's a point in Inside Out where they go inside this like imagination machine or something like that. And it's where.
Yeah. It's like the abstract thought room or something.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I think that's right. And just even watching that yesterday, I was like, this is so delightful. And like, what a weird idea. And you're playing to all of your strengths because this is so like well designed and well executed. And then when they come out the other side, they go through the stages in reverse really quickly as they're like back in the actual 3D, like fully realized world. And they're like popping up out of like little shapes.
Yeah. I think my jaw was kind of on the ground when we got there, which is just a great feeling when you're watching a movie. You're like, oh, I don't believe we're here right now. I don't believe this movie took me to this place because, well, yeah, it's really clever and it's just not something you get to see on a big screen, that sort of 2D graphical style. But it also was bringing me back to watching things like Donald Duck in Mathland. I think that's what it's called. Do you remember that old Disney short?
Because we watched that in algebra in high school.
Oh, did you? Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, just those more, I guess, quote unquote, educational Disney pieces from that's in the 60s, I imagine. Yeah. From like Mars and Beyond. We got to talk about those because the Mars and Beyond one is my favorite. And there's just so much innovation and storytelling and history crammed in those little shorts. So we'll put that on the list for someday.
Yeah, that'll be exciting because I haven't seen that one.
Oh, really? Oh,
I know I haven't. Okay. But I've seen some of the other ones from the same time period. So that'll be cool.
Yeah, let's pull back from that conversation for now. But because it's exciting. So yeah, the Inside Out abstract thought room, that is kind of at this point, and I'm wondering what Soul will do that's this, but further, because I think there's just this itch to see how far they can take it. It's a different test than trying to perfect particle physics, right? Or the perfect script, like this idea that we can just break down the visuals on the screen to like a black background with some lines on it and you will still be entertained.
Yeah, it's like a comedy bit too, which is funny. I don't know. It felt very layered in that way.
The other reason, so that specific scene to me is why I put it on this list, other than, I love it, but, I was trying to make my list based around what I think adds up to where we are with Pixar. So it's that scene, and then it's also the character of Bing Bong.
Classic character, Bing Bong.
Yeah. Who is the voice actor for that?
Richard Kind.
Ooh, good job. Yeah. But the Bing Bong character and what he represents is that's sort of that, oh, we're going here with this because he
died.
Yeah, he does die, but it's not death though. I mean, it's kind of worse, right? And actually my list ends with Coco because this is actually number 4 on my list. And Coco gets here too. This idea that Pete Docter seems obsessed with memory and forgetting because it's that Bing Bong gets forgotten, right? Which is just like the ultimate sad thing.
That's very brutal. Yeah.
Yes. That's worse than death. is the like being lost in the memory dump or whatever. Yeah, it is the memory dump that they call it. And, he makes the sacrifice for joy. And you just can't believe this movie is just going to sit here and watch this like charming character fade out in a gray, ashy pit. And, yeah, I mean, you just want to kind of stand up and applaud those sort of choices because that stuff should appear in movies, right? Like you just have to be clever enough to do it right. And, they don't overindulge it. They get out of there pretty quick, but
fast. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just like, this is just an important little moment. And they don't have to do things like this. They could just make sequels, and they do. But, when they do these special little unique projects, I think that's just what, makes you want to pay attention to the studio.
Yeah. When they make movies like Inside Out, that's like Pixar at its absolute best. And they're still making movies that are like, like the movie right after Inside Out was Good Dinosaur, which is the only Pixar movie legitimately that like I did not like at all when I saw it.
I've never seen it.
I saw it, I saw it on a plane. It was not like the optimal viewing experience, but like I was watching it and I was like, oh, this movie is for children. And it's not for everyone, which is like how I would classify all the previous and subsequent Pixar movies, including Cars or anything. Like they're technically all there and there's something for adults to enjoy. And I just could not really get there with Good Dinosaur. And I've never seen it again. So only the one time. But Inside Out is like why I love the studio so much, which is funny because even watching it yesterday, I was like, there is a lot of stuff that I would have done differently, theoretically, if I was in charge of this movie. Or they made decisions. Oh no, don't get me started.
You started. You said, here's how I would do this.
There's a couple of things. So you are opening up a big conversation because I thought about a lot of this stuff while I was watching it. So some of it is like a lot more like big picture. And then some of it is just the handling of world building, which as we kind of discussed a little bit on part one, there are Pixar movies that have, they create a world and they set the rules for that world and then you're in the world and that's the story and like that's the movie, go. And like we talked about this a little bit with Ratatouille where they like set the rule that the rat can pull the hair and that just makes the body go and that's just a rule in this universe and you accept it and you don't worry about it. But for me, there's a lot of stuff like that in Inside Out that falls apart when you actually think about it, but I do find distracting when I'm watching it. I don't know how common that is, and that's why it feels very nitpicky. But even certain things like how does the interaction of the emotions in the interior of the brain manifest on the outside? And there are parts that are clearly for like a visual, just like a fast visual reference for you and the audience. But there's like a moment where Riley is like just moved to San Francisco, like they just moved in, and she's walking around with her mom, and she's like, I'm gonna like slide down this railing. Like I'm gonna sit on this railing and like slide down the railing to the bottom of these steps. And she's like, her emotions inside are like fighting and there's conflict and everybody's stressed out. And every time the camera cuts back to like the external world and you see Riley again, she's like kind of robotically like, am I into this? No. Yes? No. Based on like what the emotions are doing. And I'm like, it's not a very subtle representation of like what it means to kind of have inner conflict, or maybe like you're feeling sad, but you're also feeling, I don't know. And it stands out too because the movie does it so well, so much. Like a lot of the time it shows the complexity of like feeling sad and happy at the same time, or having a bunch of emotions about something simultaneously. And then there's these moments where I'm like, why are you simplifying it in this way that is kind of bizarre? And like, she looks like she's kind of like robotically like glitching out as a person in those scenes. And I'm like, that's a strange choice to show that in that way.
Right.
And yeah,
it kind
that
of
feels
makes
nitpicky, but.
No, yeah, I see what you mean. That is kind of distracting when you think about it because it just implies, it sort of reduces her as a character because now she's at the whim of these other characters.
Yeah, it feels like, are they piloting her or is she like, like what is the relationship there? And it just kind of introduces some doubt. I don't know too, like one thing that struck me, and I kind of wonder if they had a different plan for this before, but so there's like the headquarters situation and then the core memories plug into that pedestal and then those all manifest these like personality islands, which I think is just like such a wonderful concept. Cause I'm like, damn, like I love the idea that like you had these foundational things happen to you in your life that you remember and those directly correlate to like who you are as a person. I actually feel like that's such a great way to show that idea. But it's very strange to me that you do not visit those locations and they aren't part of the story in any way. And I was like, why are they like running around in these weird parts in the brain and like going to the dream studio, which is a fun part that I like. But I'm like, why aren't we like going through like the goofball island or like the hockey island or like whatever, like journeying into Riley actually, like these specific aspects of her personality, like why wasn't that part of the adventure? Because it just isn't. And I found that a very strange choice.
Yeah, that's a good point. They don't actually deal with her, the things that make her who she is in the present, right? Like her modern, or like her interests, like her hobbies, the things she actively does. It's all kind of subconscious stuff.
And yeah, like the interior journey, it's like they spend a lot of time in like the memory storage place with all the memory balls, like in all the shelves, or they go to like the imagination land area, which is just like generic kind of like things that kids imagine, and they don't feel specific to Riley as a character. And it just feels weird. I'm like, this, like, it's a strange decision to me to kind of make the major set pieces of the journey of the show have nothing to do with the main character, like the human girl character. And I feel like they could have done something more with that, but...
Yeah, they're all themed, but it's one of these weird things that people that work in and around Disney and have been inspired by Disney, either it's just a type of personality, but the urge to build a world that works in a very thematic kind of pie chart, not a pie chart, but like a... So, you know, when you go into Disney World, there's like the spokes off the hub.
Yeah.
There's this big, like, ultimate design plan that in theory could be applied to, like, city design and Epcot and all these just perfect systems for people to move and ideas to pass. Inside Out kind of feels like it's doing that in the way it's built its space, because we spend a lot of time looking out and kind of mapping out where all these locations are relative to each other, and they're all connected by the train of thought, like, you know, the monorail at Disney. And it's just a fun journey. And they're all thematically related, but they don't really add up to a person, right? They don't add up to like a single thing or something.
Yeah. And I think and this is kind of where I arrived at when I was watching it and I was thinking about this idea. Because again, like, this is one of those movies I really want to say, like, I genuinely think it's just so freaking good. So, like, I don't want to be like, this movie sucks. It's like, it does not suck at all in any capacity. I love this movie. I think it's so good. And I almost think it's its own worst enemy, at least for me, because the idea of the world is so fascinating and there's so many possibilities that you can't help but be like, but what about this? And what if that was that? And like, da-da-da-da-da. And probably when they were making the movie, they were doing that. And like, how do you even, like, you really did make a perfect system of this world, and then you get to figure out, how does that work? Like, how do the emotions do this? Like, well, how do dreams work then in that kind of world? Like, da-da-da. And it's so cool to explore all those options that, I don't know, you could have done that movie like 5 different ways, and all of them probably would have been really cool, like given the same like team and amount of time.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So
they definitely could have, because like I was saying at the top of this, they had, I think, 27 different emotions they were toying with to tell this story.
Yeah.
And then at the end, they cram in a bunch of other variations on what it's like to be in, you know, basically alternate realities of their reality, which is just another person's mind. So, yeah, I mean, where's the sequel is the question.
Yeah. Inside Out 2, Outside In.
Yeah, outside, back to the inside.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential for that. I don't know. When you were talking about Coco, I'm not going to talk about Coco right now, but when you mentioned Coco, it also made me think, like, Inside Out, they've done this, they've towed the line in a lot of Pixar movies, because as you say, they play around with dark themes pretty frequently. And Inside Out, like, they're really on the edge, I feel like, of some scary stuff at times that the movie itself never really gets into. But like, even getting into the idea of depression or people's inner emotions, like, that can be very dark. And you're right that there's like that fixation about like memory and forgetting that immediately makes you think about sadder things in life. And Coco just kind of like triples down on all of that stuff. So it kind of makes me wonder with Soul, again, not knowing that much about what Soul is going to be like, but like, they're finally just being like, he's dead. Like, what's that like? So, and it's just like, I don't know, like, where are you going to go with this? Because there's things too about Inside Out. This is a legitimate complaint. And maybe it's just me. Well, I know it's not just me, but like, it's something that would bother me is even though it's like a bit joke, I really disliked the scenes maybe when you go into like the parents' head and they're very just like generically like, this is the mom and they're all the mom and this is how moms behave. And like the dad doesn't listen and he loves sports. And I was like it's honestly even a funny joke. So I don't hate it. Like I still kind of laugh about that whole section.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, this is annoying. Like what a simplistic characterization. Like, can't we? I don't know. I just wanted more than that. I didn't love that. It didn't speak to me particularly. I'd like to see a little more variance in people than just like, like a sitcom family sort of situation.
Yeah, it's funny because the movie declares right from the top each of these characters really only has one side to them. Like they're just named the emotion that they represent. And Joy is able to shift around into gray areas around Joy a little bit. I feel like she gets a little melancholy, or she has moments of that aren't quite Joy simply because she's the protagonist. So she just has to be a little multidimensional. But yeah, even the humans, they're actually the shallowest characters of the whole story, which I don't know. Yeah. Is that like an ironic take, or is that just, we don't have time to dig in here because we've already presented ourselves with so many.
Yeah. I honestly think it was that. It's like, it's easier and funnier if you just do like, oh, we're going to have like a little bit scene with the parents. So like make all of the emotions in the mom's head, like look like the mom, and make all the emotions in the dad's head look like the dad. And they're just going to have kind of a generic back and forth. Moms and dads just like don't understand each other quite right. I don't know. But just that made me wonder about like what ideologically they'll have to say about being dead and like what that's like. And I don't know, because if you're making art, you're saying something, even if you're not thinking about it. So like Inside Out has things to say about emotions and handling your emotions and like processing that kind of thing. And I don't know, what are they going to say? Coco definitely has stuff to say about death, but it is overall to me in a little bit more of a palatable way. And maybe that's just by virtue of movies like that have an afterlife already kind of have a like, this is what happens. So like you can kind of not have to worry about that part.
Yeah, Coco is a little more rewatchable for me. Even though I think I don't prefer it to Inside Out. Like I would say Inside Out is the type of thing that maybe I would like an opportunity to work on or make.
Yes.
Whereas Coco is a bit of a more conventional adventure. But the world building is great. The colors are great. The secondary characters are amazing. And it's just a little easier to deal with. It doesn't have the baggage that Inside Out brings with it. And
yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it's about like family. It's not even, I don't know, in a weird way, it's not about death almost at all. Because yes, people die, but they don't really. I don't, like a lot of the characters are already dead. You kind of know where they're going. There's the second death that happens in Coco. Is it cool if we're talking about Coco now? I'm like, oh no, can't stop this train.
We're just sort of putting, in my mind, these two kind of fit together thematically in that they're about like, perception and memory and like the way we process like relationships or I don't know.
Yeah, and I think like you, I'm guessing, these are our favorites in this latter stretch of Pixar stuff. And to me, like by far. And I really couldn't tell you which one that I like best. I don't know if that's even, I don't know, maybe it's like a mood thing, Yeah, I want to watch Coco, whatever, whenever I feel like it.
Yeah, Coco has the, like you said, it has the family thing, which I think in general, I'm more prone to put on a family-themed movie, especially while we're recording this around the holidays time. So I'm just like, okay, what's the next family movie I can put on? Yeah, it's just a thematic element that Inside Out is kind of missing. The family dynamic isn't really heartwarming in that movie, and then her emotional characters don't really feel much like a family because they're just at odds with each other so often.
Yeah, they feel like coworkers.
They definitely are it's just The Office. In fact, this is peak Office appreciation because we have like Amy Poehler and Phyllis Smith. And Mindy Kaling. Like you just have, The Office.
I didn't even realize that all three of them are in it together. That's wild. Yeah,
Mindy is discussed. So you don't see a lot of her.
Of course.
Yeah, so I guess it's just sort of the time and place for that sort of like office dynamic story to be told, which is probably part of how it ends up getting made. It's like, oh, well, this is kind of an office place comedy in its own weird way.
Yeah, and I like that about it. That's like, if I'm going to divide the two into like categories, and as I've said, Inside Out is kind of the classic Pixar feel where you're like, how did they come up with this? Like, what are they going to do next? And Coco is just like, rip my heart out with a genuine, like with a, just a story. Like, it's so story rich and it's like plot driven, and the world is very fantastical, but that's not really like the heart of it. And I think the heart of Inside Out is how fantastical the world and the idea is. And that's why Inside Out does kind of get lost. Because there are moments in Inside Out where it's like, look, the parents are being cute with the girl, and they have this thing where like, we're all monkeys together, or whatever. Or they like love hockey. And they're cute moments, but they're not that memorable in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. I was just thinking how outside of the world of the family movie, they moved to San Francisco. I like when they first arrive at that house because it's really dingy, and it could be it's just sort of a bit of complexity in the story, because just often when characters move into a new house in a movie, it's like, oh, the dad's got the perfect job, who knows what it is, but he's got plenty of money to
what though, get
us here.
It's really funny that you're saying that, though, because every time I watch that movie, I'm like, Riley, you need to suck it up, because that house is probably like millions of dollars. Right. Yeah, like, that is $1 million home in the heart of San Francisco. I do not care if you think it's a little dirty on the outside. Like, you're gonna like it. How dare you?
Yeah, you just have to, it just needs a paint job. That's it.
Yeah, like, just tidy it up and all. Even Pixar, I'm like, come on, don't throw a little dirt on the outside of this like gajillion-dollar house and try to tell me that this is a raw deal, because... Can I just give a quick shout out, by the way? This is kind of a pivot, but the startup that the dad works for, he's wearing a t-shirt for the startup. And for the longest time, never noticed it, but the company's name is called Brang. And the shirt says, what did you bring? And when I saw that, I don't know. It's like the most funny, dumb joke I've seen in a movie in so long. What did you bring? I'm like, this is just such a Silicon Valley, like you've nailed it sort of joke. 'Cause it's really dumb. It's a dumb slogan and a dumb name, but it's also like kind of believable.
God, 2015 just suddenly feels, once you start to break down that, like the real world stuff of that movie and that whole Silicon Valley-ish and just kind of a Foursquare era where everything's gamified and you're getting badges for shit.
Yeah, I like to think that it might be a little over. I think people maybe have a little more distaste for that kind of stuff because it's not cute. Like, those companies aren't cute. They just... We're really good at like branding themselves as such.
Yeah.
Although I do want to know, like, what does Brang do? Like, what could that possibly be as a startup? And they're clearly doing really well if you're going to live in this gajillion $billion house.
Well, that's where we get to in the sequel, I feel, that I'm rapidly making notes on in my mind.
Yeah. Inside this brain of the CEO of Brang.
Boy, thinking about this movie and as you describing all the places the story goes, we just don't have something like this. This is just such a stupid thing to say, but we don't have this sort of thing anymore. It's like we have everything all the time, but just mainstream movies don't deal with all this type of stuff. Not even thematically, but just in terms of plot and amount of characters in this story. There's nothing streamlined really about this movie in any way. It's just going in a million different directions and bouncing around, and it's colorful and fun, and you can follow it because you can just follow the colors of the movie and they will lead you to the end. But when you think of other stuff that was coming out, like Force Awakens came out in 2015, that's such an opposite movie. It's like, here's somebody, they want something. Here's another person that can help them. Here they go. And now they're on a spaceship. It's just such a narrow path. Like, it's such a small journey.
And not even that, but it's like such a direct throwback to an old movie that already exists. So it really is like towing a very narrow thread. Yeah,
it's just the sort of experimental state that Pixar was in here. I guess we'll see what Soul ends up being. Maybe it's conventional in certain ways, but I guess maybe, who knows if it matters anymore. Like we were talking about in the first one, I was just so caught up in this idea of the Steve Jobs-ness and the way they were allowed to do whatever they want. Is that always a good thing? I don't know. Is Inside Out great? Could it have been better if it had less money and less opportunity to indulge itself?
Yeah, that's another. I know we kind of grappled over that. Not you and I, but just mentally we were grappling over that. Like the first run of Pixar movies and how they were just like nailing it, like film after film after film and like not really knowing. And I certainly think like, you know, here's the bankroll, go nuts, like make the stuff. And that being kind of a recipe for succeeding in the way that they did. Cause it's like, it's a blank check that like a lot of people don't ever have access to ever in their lives. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I mean, that isn't a guarantee of success either. Like people do have opportunities like that and, you know, squander it or it doesn't work out or whatever. Pixar just feels so inexplicable to me sometimes.
There's a couple more Pixar movies after this because we're still sort of stuck in 2015. And it was a great year for everybody.
Yeah, back in this pre-2016.
Oh, yeah. Good Dinosaur came out that same year. That's funny. I mean, yeah, it's just sort of just an opportunity to try to tap into this other sub market of like really young kids, which, yeah, I guess who knows if they'll ever go back there again.
I don't know. Honestly, this is my very brief speculation about The Good Dinosaur, knowing nothing about it. But I have a feeling that they really struggled with trying to figure out how to make that movie something on the tier of past Pixar movies, but they were pushing that technology so heavily. And at some point they like crossed a point of no return. It's like, we have to make something. And so they just kind of stapled on like bare bones story because it hits a lot of the same beats, if I'm remembering correctly, of like The Lion King. Like the dad dies horribly in front of the son. And then the son, like near the beginning, and he spends a lot of the movie trying to find his way home. That kind of thing. And I don't know. And the friendship with the human boy, which was a big focal point of the marketing. Like, oh, imagine a world where dinosaurs and like humans shared the same Earth time, you know, and lived together. And I was like, I cannot wait for this movie. I love dinosaurs. Like, let's open this pit up. And then nothing really comes of that friendship that I retain, that I really remember. And it just feels like they were just like, we got to have them. This needs to be out. Just do the story and make it and put it out. And I don't know.
Yeah, it's
kind of
not
strange.
But that movie, looking back now, feels like something that would have just ended up on Disney Plus and they would have talked about it for a week. And
kind of.
It would have just appeared because the stakes of it just don't seem as high. It seems like fodder for little kids, and that's it. It's like, why should I go to the movie theater to see The Good Dinosaur? Like the promise of it is good, but what you're getting is not maybe worth the trip.
Yeah, I think maybe they were hoping, because it has a tech demo kind of energy to it too, where the landscapes really do look amazing, you know, and some of them really just look like, oh, you just like went out and filmed this, and this is, you know, film. But that's not enough. And I don't know. That's why it just feels like something truly went wrong there in the development, whatever it was. I do vaguely recall as well that I think that they had like a full voice cast. And then at some point halfway through the production, they scrapped all of them and like rehired every character, like a new voice actor. And I wonder if I don't think I'm making that up though. I think that happened. And when I read that in Cartoon Brew or something, I was like, oh, that can't be good. Like something has happened here.
Right. It's one of those stories that are probably fairly common. We just only hear about them when they're on high profile projects. And when you're, you know, an obsessive nerd, like right. Such as myself. You're actively looking. Hoovering down that. Yeah, that's a topic I'd like to get into a little more, even with not necessarily big movies, but just when things totally fall apart and you have to start back up again. I love reading that stuff because it just makes you feel a little bit better about times it's happened to you, either like professionally or something you're working on yourself. You're like, oh yeah, everything goes wrong. Like the final product is really only the tip of the iceberg of what it took to get there, which involves recasting people, redrawing, throwing things out. Yeah. And I honestly,
I always found that to be a strength. I have a little bit of mixed feelings because like Pixar is so about that. And I think animated movies are about that. Like they rework and like you hear stories about like Walt Disney's story meetings where he's just like ripping your drawings off the board and being like, no, like this is trash, da 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 da. Really brutal sounding stuff. And I say I have mixed feelings about it because I'm realizing now as I get older, like how much extra crunch and work you're putting on your employees. And it's kind of like a capitalist thing where I'm like, oh, this is ridiculous. Like you're probably working too hard. But from a, young at heart perspective where I just want the best thing, that's always seemed like a strength. And then I would like to read more about this. How like Pixar's experience with this, because it just seems like the longer they went on as a studio, the more that happened, the more that you would hear about troubled production where it as not so much. Like the first time I'd been lucky enough to go to Pixar a few times.
Oh yeah, that's true. I meant to ask you to kind of share some of that story.
Oh, it's very cool, but mostly it's just like, it's really neat on the inside. They got cool stuff in there, which is true. And the first time I ever went, Brave had come out that year. 'Cause it was when I was in LA, I had a motion design internship in LA when I was in college. And so I spent the summer in LA and I went up to Pixar as one does. And the guy who was showing me around, there was like Brave art all over the walls because they, decorate kind of the main hall and they have like all the artwork up of whatever kind of the movie is, that they're working on or like had just come out. And I remember him mentioning in passing, just like, we knew something was going to be kind of up with this movie because it took like 5 or 6 years to get through it, which these other movies do take a long time. But I think that was the longest that it had been by a significant margin at that point. I really don't know what's normal now. And I know like work schedules have increased a lot, like we need like 3 movies to come out every year, like that kind of thing. And I think Pixar had been lucky enough to work at a little more sedate pace before then. But it was just interesting to me because I was like, yeah, I kind of wondered. You hear about this movie, and then it just doesn't come out. It doesn't come out. And I want to know, like, why did this start happening in Pixar? And I was just skimming the Wikipedia page of The Good Dinosaur, and it's like there's this huge block in the Wikipedia page about the revisions and like the troubled production and story problems. And they pulled a bunch of directors off this movie, it looks like, which is really interesting to me. And now I'm like, we need to get into this. And I don't want to, it's not about putting Pixar on trial, but it's so interesting that like, why does this keep happening? And why at some point did it seem to become an actual issue in terms of like what the final product was?
Could it be a case of maybe just nobody was passionate about it?
It's interesting to me though, because, and maybe like that's a total possibility. But one of the people who came up with the idea is one of the people who got removed from it because of story problems. And I'm like, who's making those decisions and why? Like, what is the reasoning? We'll just have to have them on the podcast to be like, hey, what's the hot goss? What happened?
Yeah, it would be nice to hear some of that. And I guess some stuff like that isn't going to get talked about just because you don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But yeah, a little behind the scenes of just these massive endeavors with high stakes financially and just knowing why stuff just doesn't happen or why something happens the way it does.
Well, yeah, because I wish I had an offhand example, but I mean, that happens sometimes and then the final product comes out amazing and it's because they spent all of this time just like refining it and perfecting it. Or maybe sometimes you just need to scrap everything and you whip the final thing together kind of fast and it ends up coming out as gold. And that's just one of those serendipitous things that happens. Well,
not to jump back in time, but Toy Story 2 is a little bit of that, right? Because it was first intended to be like a direct-to-video sequel. And then there's the whole thing about it getting erased and ending up, they had to like pull it from somebody's backup drive and they had to drive that massive computer back and forth. Like there's just a fun story about how Toy Story 2 got to be, a great film. But
even a theatrical film at all.
And they also squeezed it in really quickly because you've got Toy Story 95, Bugs Life 98, and then Toy Story 2 is 1999.
Yeah, 1999.
So when did they start making Toy Story 2? It couldn't have been more than like 2 years before or something, right? So in a way, that movie's kind of rushed, I would think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right?
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a lot of research on this because I think it's rich. And even to go a little bit back further in time, I kind of forgot about this until you mentioned Toy Story 2, but Toy Story was a complete train wreck for a while where like Woody was a huge jerk and no one liked him.
Right.
And they kept like showing and I think like on the Blu-rays or something, I know I've seen like story reels from the original versions and iterations of Toy Story where Woody is just like this nasty character and he genuinely is super unlikable. And people were like, this movie's not good. Like he sucks. We don't like him. And then they turned it into something gold. And like, he's still, you know, obviously a jerk in that movie, but that's the point. And then he has this like arc and you want him to succeed and like grow and change as you're watching it. And it's just really interesting because they had to grind all that out too. They didn't just spin it out of nothing, you know, and just like, here's the gold, like, here we are.
There is something with watching a lot of students come up with characters for stories. You often start in a place of like sarcasm and just shittiness. Like it's easier to make a character that sucks because they're kind of just more fun to brainstorm for because it's easier to write dialogue for somebody that's got a bad attitude. There's just an extra flavor, like there's a spiciness to them that can evoke some of the character design. But at the end of the day, do you want to watch this character go on an adventure and learn something? No, you have to take these characters and move them to the side, or you have to just whittle them down or to their core and then reinvent them to have an appeal that makes them a main character. That's why so many shorts, like if you watch Tom and Jerry, they're both kind of shitty. Like you don't really like either of them because it's just a great way to write gags is to have two antagonists.
Yeah, but they're not expecting you to like emotionally connect, which is not, and then it like that works. But then if you took, well, I guess we'll see because they're making a Tom and Jerry movie.
Yeah, the trailer looks like a joke.
It's interesting. It's one big gag of a trailer. We'll see. We'll see how it shakes out. I mean, somebody will see. I might not. I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, yeah,
But it is interesting. That's a challenge, you know, when you take those characters and like put them into a feature film setting is like I literally have no idea what to expect. As somebody who wasn't like a huge Tom and Jerry fan, I didn't dislike it per se, but I was just not, I don't know, just a cartoon to me. I have no idea what to expect if I like sat down in a theater to watch that movie. Zero idea what to expect.
Like in Tom and Jerry, I expect the human characters in that movie will have the character arcs, and Tom and Jerry will kind of just reboot themselves at the end of it so they can make another one, right? They're just there to be the flavor. Or
maybe he'll finally catch him and eat him, and then the cycle will end.
Yeah, finally, thank God. Yeah, it's like,
we'll all be free.
It's like the rumors of that one Roadrunner cartoon. Did you hear? I saw the one where he catches him. I saw it. Okay, take it easy.
Finally, that son of a bitch.
But it's just tricky when you bridge the gap of here's the real world and here's the animated world. Like the way characters grow and change is not the same sort of thing, which I guess maybe Inside Out is suffering from that a little bit because the human characters feel so flat because, you know, the cartoon characters in their head are so heightened. So it seems like the humans are on less of a journey than the characters in their head or something.
Yeah. I almost wish that they had bridged that in some way and not had it just be like they're just observing Riley kind of the entire time and then pushing buttons to like do stuff. And I don't know. I don't know.
So here's a question that I don't remember because I haven't seen it in a while, but do they actually affect her in any way? I mean, do they resolve anything for her or do they just sort of realize that she's changing? Is it the Raiders of the Lost Ark problem where Indiana Jones doesn't actually impact the plot? He's just along for the ride? Is it like...
No. This is horrible because, again, I just watched it. And so I should remember this crystal clearly. But I will say, like, the climax of that movie always loses me a little bit because there's that part. I don't like this. And I wish they hadn't done it, even though I think it was a funny joke and it makes sense. But just for some reason, I'm just not that into it. But when she makes a stack of, imaginary boyfriends. Like,
Oh,
like
yeah.
Riley has this imaginary boyfriend machine. And to get back to headquarters, Joy makes a giant stack of them, uses them to like fling herself onto a trampoline and get up to it. And I was like, I don't like this. I just don't think it was a good enough solution to the problem of her not being in headquarters. And I don't have a solution. So
No,
I don't know.
You're right. That is stupid. And something that I don't like in newer animation is just showing you look how much computer power we have. Wreck-It Ralph 2 does that, where it's just a bunch of Ralphs that form into a giant Ralph, not to spoil the end of that movie. Did we see that together? No.
No, but
Okay.
I felt like almost I was being too aggressive about it one time when we hung out and I talked to you about my feelings about that movie and how I really did not like it at all and thought it was bad. And that part in particular, I was just repulsed by it, honestly.
Yeah, there's something gross. Yeah, I feel exactly that same way. And I wonder if a lot of other people do, because there's just something unappealing about just a big pile of a character over and over and having each of them be like a particle in the bigger form. It's just not done well.
Revolting. I don't know. That's a whole nother episode.
Yeah, we can do a Wreck-It Ralph one sometime if we just run out of stuff.
Like, I love Wreck-It Ralph 1 and Wreck-It Ralph 2. I'm like, that didn't happen. Deleted.
No.
To
Yeah.
answer your original question, though, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying about that moment in Inside Out when she slides down the railing and the emotions are like, I'm sad, I'm happy, whatever. And she's like, am I going to slide down the railing? I guess. And then she slides down and she's like smiling. And then she gets to the bottom and she's like, I didn't like that. And it's just like, this is not how I feel when I'm like having a roller coaster emotional day. It doesn't go like that. But at the end, so a quick recap of the plot essentially is Riley or her brain people decide that Riley needs to run away and go back to Minnesota where she was happy. Which I guess is like a believable kind of childhood plan, honestly. And the way that she has this idea, which I think doesn't answer your question but touches on it a little bit, is Anger pulls out a little light bulb from a pile of light bulbs and plugs it into the console. And that is her having the idea, I guess. It's a good visual, but again, it just feels so mechanical. And I just have mixed feelings about that. And how the whole plot resolves, like Riley has like stolen her parents' wallet, bought a bus ticket, is on the bus, like going to Minnesota. Joy fires herself up into the headquarters window via boyfriends and busts back in there. And what's happening is because they've like the emotions have set her on this path. And I guess presumably because Joy has been absent for a certain amount of time, the whole console is becoming disabled. It like starts to gray over and like it's like turning to stone. And they're like, we can't interact with it. And Joy, just by virtue of, I think, being there, gets control of the console back, and that process sort of reverts. So it was something about her. This is something I was sort of getting at and didn't quite, like the conversation just didn't quite lead to the point that I was like, oh yeah, this is something that I sort of have an issue with in Inside Out. Is like, yes, Joy being there is what saved her ultimately, because then she can work on the console and she's like, beep, boop, boop, like you need to go back home to your parents. And Riley literally just kind of sits up on the bus and is like, what am I doing? Like, stop this bus now. And like gets off the bus and goes home. But it really begs the question, like, if Joy never made it out of the dump and just disappeared, what the hell does that mean for Riley? Like,
right.
Can you completely delete happiness from your brain? And maybe yes, but like that's also not, I don't feel qualified to speculate on something like that. It begs these questions that are really advanced if you pursue that line of thought. And that's why sort of I was like, Pixar is towing like one of the most dangerous lines that they have yet here, because there are some really messed up implications. And like, if Joy didn't get there in time, what does that mean? Like, or could Joy have always reversed the no console depression process? I don't know. Because in a way, that's a really beautiful metaphor for what it's like to kind of emotionally shut down and have the numbness. But just being like, can Joy die actually? Like, is that permanent? What does that mean?
Right. Yeah. It's like, what's the goal with this movie? I mean, any of these movies are to evoke something in the viewer. at the end of the day, I guess, right? That's why people tell stories, because they want to like engage with an audience and communicate an idea. So to set it in this scenario where you're speaking directly about emotions and speculating on how they connect and what it means to lose one and how that changes the course of our lives, like our destinies, our fates or whatever, you could probably tell this story in a Cars universe or something, right? You could probably get a lot of these ideas, or you could, get the same response from your viewer by just putting it in a world that you made up instead of saying all these things about human existence and how we arrive at our personalities. It's just a strange choice. It's just one of those paths that an artist gets to journey down if they're unencumbered by IP or, whatever else in their industry that's going to slow down this sort of like weird path of arriving at an interesting story that's just utterly unique.
Yeah, I think it's what I like about stuff like this. Like, I don't know, even like having some of those issues with Inside Out, like any movie that is just like, we're going for this, and they just do it, like I automatically have a certain amount of respect for, if not genuinely love it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, just something to think about.
This is pretty much the Inside Out episode. I think we're I mean, give us a break. It's episode 2, talking to the listenership. But we burned through like all these Pixar movies, and then we kind of like held out on this one because really there isn't a whole lot to say about anything else going forward, other than our next episode is going to be an incredible centric episode. True?
Yes.
Yeah.
I consent formally.
And I think that'll help us to just focus on the Brad Bird-ness of it. Because
sorry, go ahead.
Well, the Pete Docter journey is kind of at an end. That's why for me, I'm hanging on this movie, because I think it's kind of the culmination of his powers. He's proven his worth over and over again. He's done, I don't know, you couldn't really say more conventional movies. It's not like Monsters, Inc. is conventional in any way, and Up is conventional. But Inside Out just seems like, okay, Pete, we've got a group of people. I mean, it's not like he did the whole thing himself. It's not a Brad Bird situation. But he did direct it and clearly has a major voice in the themes and the places these characters go. And that's why I'm curious to tie this to Soul, because it's his first, just looking at the wiki here, it's his first, Soul will be his next movie after, since Inside Out.
Yeah. Yes. But it's funny, and I feel like we're just kind of saying this the whole time without out and out saying it, but if I had to really pinpoint it, I feel like Pete Docter to me is like, that's Pixar, which is not true, but I think the reason both of us ended up talking about Pete Docter movies so much during this was just because, like, his movies seem to give it that quality of, like, here's a colorful world, and we are going to get into that and see what it's about. It's like Monsters, Inc. was that, and even Up was that. And then definitely Inside Out.
I mean, the balloons in Up, it's that movie's all about color.
Yeah, the bird, it's super interesting. I don't know. Pixar is very colorful throughout, but
I would say Pixar is Pete Docter in what we know of it now. And probably, we've probably reached peak Pixar and we're coming down the other side of it, I would assume, at some point. I don't think we're going to get the best Pixar movie going forward, but maybe.
Well, I mean,
we still could, I guess, but it's more an age thing, I guess. We've sort of grown up enough where the magic of animation, we just know too much to truly be captured.
That's totally true, honestly.
Right?
I thought that too about Inside Out, even, where I'm like, yeah, I'm nitpicking this stuff, but also like I've been permanently ruined by the fact that I love movie making so much and animation history and animation filmmaking and da 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 da. So like I can't just sit there and be taken by a story. It's not the same as when you're a kid and watching.
Yeah, it's impossible. It's more like watching a sporting event almost. Like when we saw Onward, especially seeing it with another person, like you and I saw that together, and both knowing each other and knowing what we know about things and what we like. It's like, oh, we're here to just analyze this movie in a way.
I can't help it. Yeah.
I mean, that's okay. It's just a different type of appreciation you can have for something. But I mean, I still cry during things, and I still fall asleep during things the same way I did when I was a kid.
Yeah. And it's not like, and of course I'm immediately forgetting any movie that had a significant impact on me lately, but it's not like, oh, well, like Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which actually was the last movie I did actually see in theaters was Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And then I saw Emma the same day.
Oh yeah. I remember you telling me that.
And so it was a back-to-back situation. And that was, it was a great way to go out. But that movie, like, I didn't think about, like, oh, camera, whatever, like, oh, lighting choices. Like, I was just taken by that movie. And so it does happen, but it is different. It's just not going to be the same as it was, especially with animation. Like, there's always going to be that, how did they do this? Like, what would I have done? Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
Tragically ruined by this forever.
Yeah, animation, it's just, it just connects to different things in your brain than watching actual humans on a screen.
And it's so good. We love it.
Yeah. So yeah, in conclusion to are we wrapping up the Pixar conversation almost? I think the Pete Doctor-ness, I think he is Pixar more than any of the other people just looking at this list. Not because maybe the movies did the best at the box office, but they're the ones you remember and they stand out and they make this studio distinct. Like his movies are the ones that people are like, oh, that's a Pixar movie and not a DreamWorks movie or something. You know, like there's certain things, like Cars could have been another studio, maybe.
Yeah,
right?
I do agree with that.
Whereas Up could not have been anybody else, I don't think.
No, that's so true.
Right?
And he makes the weird ones. And that's saying a lot at a studio that continually makes weird ass movies. Like Ratatouille is very weird. WALL-E is very weird, not Pete Docter. But Up is so bizarre. It's just such a bizarre movie. And honestly, Inside Out is very bizarre. Mm-hmm. And they all that's like Pete Docter in a team of people at a studio of people who are just making wild stuff. He's just like, yeah, but what if we made it even more wild? And what if it was like emotions are people and it's my daughter and we kind of get into like what does it mean to grow depressed for the first time in your young human life, and we'll just make something out of that. Make that a movie. And I love that.
Yeah, I love it too. Did you say you had something about Toy Story 3 or something you wanted to say?
I was going to bring that up this time because I just thought we would talk about it. And then obviously we spent all of our time lavishing attention on Inside Out and to a lesser degree, Coco. And now I'm kind of hesitating because I'm wondering if we should just talk about the Toy Story franchise. And so...
To me, it's detached from Pixar, which is still allowed to do interesting, weird things. Toy Story is not. Toy Story is a legacy. And if you fuck with it, people will lose their shit, which very much narrows the types of things you can make. That's why I think when you get to something like Toy Story 3, it's just a little colder because now we just have to jump into, oh, let's put the toys in a different genre. Now they're in a heist. Now they're doing this. Now we're playing off of this thing you've seen in other movies. But it's fun because it's your friends from Toy Story. Even Toy Story 2 does this a little bit. It has its Star Wars reference and stuff, right? It's just, this is where you end up if you just keep cycling through characters that have completely resolved their arcs. Yes.
So, and I'm trying desperately not to actually just launch into my film because I think we should save this.
No, you're right. The only thing we're both saying is that it's a different thing and we'll talk about it because the conversation is all connected with that. Whereas here we can say, Up and WALL-E, these sort of weird outings and investigations with story and character and color and animation style. Something in Inside Out we didn't even talk about was the way they do the texture of the characters. They almost feel like Muppets. They're like furry because they're fuzzy. Yeah. Yeah. They don't have, it's all like particles. They're just like your hand would pass right through them, which is just such a great tiny detail that you just have to really be perceptive to catch. Like you're noticing it, probably, but you're not aware of it.
Yeah. I always liked it.
Yes.
It's a visual thing to grab onto that feels very good. Mm-hmm. I don't know, in that itchy primal Pixar way that we've talked about a couple times.
Yeah, they're just little like masses of energy, which is so good. And, that's I mean, a tech, I guess, that can apply in other situations. I'm sure they use that in something like Coco or to make something feel ethereal in other cases. But it's not like they cash in on that aesthetic over and over again like another studio would or another type of franchise. Whereas like, I don't know. I guess I'll always use Star Wars as the go-to point. But with a Star Wars movie, all you have to do is make it look like it was made in 1977, and and it's Star Wars over and over again, right? Whereas Pixar is not that. They're allowed to grow and change and do weird things and dip into different looks and categories because that's what we expect from them.
Oh, another good thing about animation, which, wow, we're just crushing it in terms of throwing out good episode ideas, but we should talk about like what animation is to us and why we like it so much, or try to analyze that in each other and figure that out. But I always love that about animation because it truly is like you can manifest anything. I mean, with a lot of money and time and elbow grease. But you're literally God. Like you can just make anything exist. And I just think that's so cool. And it's just like a movie like Inside Out couldn't happen any other way. Which is not really true, but without a heaping helping of visual effects and stuff like that, it couldn't happen. Like I just saw recently, Neil hated it and I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. The live action Speed Racer movie.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you saw that.
I've never watched it all the way through, but I should.
It's very shocking visually, just like it really is. But it was fascinating watching that movie and being like, wow, like, regardless of how you do ultimately feel about this, like I understand there's a contingent of people that call that movie a masterpiece. And I understand why, even though I don't really feel that way about it. But I get it. It's so weird and it's so itself. And visually, it's just, they were just like, we're doing this.
I think when we say masterpiece, I think that's what we mean though, right? It's just got an individuality to it.
Yes.
Right?
I guess that is true then. And just like to me, because when I call Ratatouille a masterpiece, I'm also just like, it made me feel things. And like, it just speaks to me in this way that I can't describe. And I feel that way about all the things that I love. They make me feel a certain way. Like I couldn't tell you why I like this band or that band, whatever. It's just that when I'm listening to that music, I feel a feeling that I only feel when I listen to something I love. Couldn't tell you. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. And so, no, I didn't feel that in Speed Racer, but Neil was just, I think, genuinely sensory overloaded by that movie. And it just legitimately was too much for him to just sit there and take in all of these violent colors. And it's so frenetic and all of this stuff. And I was just like, I don't love it either. It's not speaking to me personally, but I just love that it exists. I love that they made this and that they made it how they wanted to make it and that it came out this way. And I wouldn't change it. I'm glad it's this.
Yeah.
And like that stuff is awesome. People should make more of that stuff. And Inside Out, I feel the same way. It's just like there's trains flying around and you're falling off cliffs and there's a giant clown and like a dog splits in half and like all this stuff is happening. And I don't know. It's just this like ultimate power of creation and visualizing things that you couldn't before.
Yeah. The story of animation is it is the pursuit of control, right? We want to bring things to life, like all the principles of squash and stretch. Like, well, a book I want to talk about is, the Disney Illusion of Life book and just the
classic,
giant classic. Just the little diagram of here's how you make a sack of flour come to life. It's like you just are a magician in the world of animation with the challenge of how do I make not only this come to life for me, but for somebody looking at it, right? It's the magic trick of it. So yeah, it's just the perfect pairing of sense of control and also people's understanding. As we like move through the world of animation collectively, we can make things like Inside Out, a thing that could never have been made like 40 years ago or maybe even 10 years ago because people wouldn't fucking understand what the hell was going on, right? Like we're all like sitting on the shoulders of who came before in the realm of animation. And that's like part of the thrill. It's like, oh, we can do this now, or we can tell this type of story, or we can talk about this in this way. Oh,
I need to ask you about this because I don't know if we'll have time because I was like, this is such a perfect Christmas thing. Did you see the movie Klaus?
Oh, no, but that's on my Christmas watch list this year because I just missed it last year. I don't know why.
I didn't. We watched it for the first time over the weekend, and I was just totally blown away by that movie. I don't want to oversell it either.
I'm excited to see it.
Hesitant about that, but I had high expectations because people were, like, this movie's unreal, so beautiful, like genuinely a really sweet film, and it was so much better than I was even expecting. And just like, I don't know, it's kind of that they're like Ivan Earl and like mid-century classic sort of painterly graphic design background aesthetic, all of that, and just like cranked up to just an unimaginable level. And part of me was just sitting there being like, I can't believe I'm watching that. Like, I cannot believe this exists. Like, you took this aesthetic that I always grew up with and I loved it so much. I still love it so much. And you've just elevated it genuinely, like 2 levels above what I thought was even possible. And this is all just visually. Like, and it's a great movie, genuinely. It was like, this story's really cute. Like, for a Christmas movie, it's really, really delightful. I might go put it on
right now
after this call, just because I was like, I could really use some Christmas vibes right now.
I feel like somebody should have been paying you right there. You were just like, this sounds like the
gushing,
perfect movie.
and just to see like it's so like vivacious, the like 2D animation, and seeing a 2D animated movie like that just feels so good. Like, thank you for bringing this back to me. I really crave that.
I know, it's such a rare thing, and it's like, you can't blame people for not indulging that as much anymore because it's just so fucking hard to make. But when it's done, it is like a precious gem. I love that you dropped the Ivan Earl thing, because I was just looking at the poster for it, and the beard of Claus, or one of the characters, like reminded me of Sleeping Beauty's hair. That just flat little like whipped cream whip that it does, that one little half curl. That's just exactly that look.
So that movie is just screaming that kind of stuff at you in such a satisfying way. It's just, Well, I think we've covered the entire possible gamut of all animation ever.
Yeah, we just sort of spiraled out of the orbit of Pixar, and we're just, animation, it just looks great. Well,
so
I think
good.
we're brainstorming episode ideas. So next time when we come back after this Pixar warm-up sesh, we'll just be hyper focused on something, and then just kind of dig into the nitty-gritty of it. Because I think we've just sort of overwhelmed ourselves by just crossing. This was my fault. I was like, let's just talk about all of Pixar, and then when Soul comes out, we'll talk about that one. But I think it was a good warm-up.
So, and I also think there's a couple things going on here. And first of all, I'd just like to thank the listening audience, if you're there, for still listening this far.
Yeah, thanks.
Because that is very kind of you. We appreciate it. And also, separately from that, it is the end of 2020. We're all kind of emotionally hanging by a thread. I'm having like bi-weekly breakdowns. So talking about this that I genuinely love is like such an escape. I don't think about any of the world's problems. We're talking about the Pixar movies that we love. So I think hopefully in the future, you can forgive us for being very all over the place, with this. Our emotions are probably like, like all over, right now.
Well, I think we're doing people a favor. I think we're sparking little ideas in people's heads about stuff that they've never thought about in the world of animation.
Yeah, please write into us and let us know what your emotional people inside your head are thinking and reacting and saying to us. So I'll just say in future episodes, as Ira was saying, we do have a lot more of an idea of structure. It'll be more kind of specific topics, like you mentioned, the Incredibles. Maybe that'll be an episode in and of itself, a little more self-contained.
Well, I think that is that what we're doing next week. Do you want to do the Incredibles double feature?
I'm totally down for that.
Yeah, me too. It's on the schedule. I think we just have to. It's the only other thing on the schedule.
Oh, that's true.
Now.
We cannot deviate from the schedule. And we won't.
No, we never will.
So you all don't have access to the schedule. Only Ira and I do. But just FYI, it exists and it's rigid and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, but my Google password is actually quite weak. So you could probably get in there and get into the drive.
Take a shot. Yeah, if you feel.
If you know the name of all my pets, you could get there.
That's all we have for today. Join us next week as we focus in on Brad Bird's Pixar debut, The Incredibles.
Check out all our previous episodes and whatnot at cartoonfeelings.com. You can tweet at us and check out our Instagram. Both are at Feeling Cartoons.
Feel free to write us an email as well at cartoonfeelingspodcast@gmail.com. We would love to know what you're thinking and feeling. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
That's all for now, folks. We'll see you next time.